Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Finance Committee. Tonight's agenda includes reviewing and voting recommendation on our special town meeting warrant for the special town meeting next week, and also discussing setting a meeting prior to that special town meeting for the Finance Committee. So the first thing I want to do is also read the statement that in accordance with our open meeting law, Chair announces that the meeting is being recorded and asks if anyone else is also recording. Hi, thank you. Just read it. Okay. First thing I want to do is read the article. This is Article 2, to see if town meeting will appropriate a sum of money by borrowing or otherwise to purchase a certain parcel of land containing approximately 50 acres and currently classified and taxed as agricultural land pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 61A. The land is commonly known as South Meadow Farm and located along South Hold Road, also known as South Hold Road Extension, and South Hold Meadow Road in Auburn, Massachusetts, owned by the Sylvia C. Post Family Limited Partnership 1 and Sylvia C. Post Limited Partnership 4, or act on anything relative thereto. And I do want to read one statement first. This is from the chair of our Finance Committee, Kevin Hussey, and he states that given my past professional banking dealings that involve this property, I am recusing myself from this meeting, and that's from Kevin Hussey, the chair of our Finance Committee. So I'll open up the floor for discussion. Do we want to hear from our town administrator, assistant town administrator?
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Finance Committee. We have provided you tonight with a packet that identifies some funding options that we presented to the Board of Selectmen at their meeting Monday evening, and we also verbally presented these funding options at a previous meeting as well. Shortly after the verbal presentation, those options were posted on the town's website for review. We have slightly modified there was a modification to one of those options that is in your packet tonight that we will go over as well. As you may or may not be aware, the town has been notified that there is an anonymous donor that has pledged $1 million towards the purchase of this property. So the Board of Selectmen, with some restrictions on the property, they want it used for passive use only. As a result of that, for presentation purposes, there have been financing options utilizing the $1 million and financing options without the $1 million. As you are well aware, the Board of Selectmen would have to accept that gift. They have not done that yet. So that still remains in flux. There has been some suggestion that the board do not accept the gift, and there are others that have embraced the gift. So until such time, we are presenting models with and without. The purchase price based upon the purchase and sales agreement between the seller, Post Family, and the developer, Sundin Tillman, sets a price at $2,865,000 for approximately 50 acres of Chapter 61A land. There is also an option B to that purchase and sales agreement that puts a value of $250,000 on 5 parcels of land, 2 of which are contiguous to the 61A property, 3 which are not. Under state law, the Board of Selectmen do not have the authority to exercise their right of first refusal on that property. Therefore, it is not part of the financing package that is before you tonight. They are 2 separate P&Ss. So in this packet that I gave you, up in the right-hand corner, it identifies option 1. Now, you're going to remember, this is a short-term borrowing that is applied as a result of the gift because we would be receiving the gift in either 3 or 4 installments. we wouldn't be getting the $1 million up front. Therefore, once the board, if the board should take their vote to exercise their option to purchase, we would have approximately 90 days from that point going forward to close and make payment in full. There was a financing structure within the P&S that the seller had put out there. DOR has indicated to us that municipality could not adhere to those financing terms because it's against borrowing limitations and requirements as set forth by DOR regulations. So, getting into the specifics, as you can see, option 1 would allow the town to borrow short-term 2.865, so we could make that payment within the first 90 days, with a 4-year pay-down option of $250,000. So up front, we would borrow on a short-term basis in the form of bands, $2,865,000. 1 year later, those bands would be renewed, less $250,000. So year 2, we would roll that and borrow $2,615,000, so forth and so on until we received the million, and then we would permanently bond $1.865 million in year 4. For purposes of presentation, we computed an interest rate of 1.50. I can tell you that we just went out for $11.2 million of bands roughly 60 days ago at a rate of 1.25. The time before that, we received rates slightly under 1. So the rates are creeping up, so we did project a rate of 1.50. Over that 4-year period, we would pay approximately $177,000 to borrow that money over a 4-year period. The tax rate impact would be 2 cents per $1,000 of value. And for the median house, which was presented by the chief assessor last night for FY15 values, pegged the median house value of $227,980. So for purposes of cost for these financing models, we are using that median price. For the median price, it would be $4.56 each year for the short-term borrowing. Some of the pros, if we were to ban this, the ban rates have never been better. I mean, we'd get a great rate. The uncertainty is carrying that ban for a 4-year period, converting it in year 4. We don't know what the rates are going to be. And there are other options that allow us to go out and bond immediately. We know we're going to get a great rate today. We don't know what the rates are going to be like in year 4. Option 2 basically just shows what we would pay in year 4 when we're bonding the $1.865 million. If we were to go out today, we know we would get a rate of about 2% on a 10-year term. A 26-year term would be 3.10. Let me tell you that the term limits under Chapter 44, Section 7.3 that we're borrowing this money under allows for a term of anywhere from 10 to 30 years. Because we would be banning this for a portion of time, those years are reduced off the maximum term of 30. That's why we're showing 26. For purposes of presentation, we show this as a level debt service. We could do it as a declining debt service schedule, but it's tough to put a per 1,000 tax rate value on declining debt because it changes every year. So for level debt service, for a 10-year term, it would cost the town about $205,600. That's total debt and interest each year. That would be about 10 cents per $1,000 of value. For the median house, once again, it would mean an annual increase in taxation of about $22.80. And the debt service interest over the 10-year period, the town would pay $211,400. At the 26-year term, at a rate of 3.10, the level debt service is almost half of that, $107,040. The tax rate per 1,000 would be 6 cents per 1,000. Median house value annually, $13.68. Total interest paid over the 26-year period, $878,075. Significantly much higher. The pros for the 10-year term, lower interest rate versus the 26, it's obvious. Higher cost per, it's a con, higher tax rate per, but you are retiring that debt in a shorter period of time. And the 10-year term would be better for our overall debt profile because we're retiring the debt in a shorter period of time. Pros and cons of the 26-year term, higher interest rate versus the 10-year by about 1.10%. It is a lower cost to the taxpayers. It makes it more palatable, but we're paying it over a longer period of time. In addition to that, we're paying much more interest to borrow that money over a greater length of time. Under the 10-year schedule, this is the debt and interest we would be paying. If you look at the bottom, this is the number I indicated earlier, $211,400. This is the 26-year debt schedule. Total interest paid, $878,075. Option 3, this would assume no gift, which would mean we wouldn't have to go out for a short-term borrowing. We could bond it within the first 90 days. Once again, a 10-year term, we will get a yield of about 2% based upon our current rating. Level debt service is $314,700. That would be about 16 cents per every $1,000 of value using 15 rate. For the median house, it would mean a annual tax rate increase of $36.48 over the entire year. Total interest paid over the 10-year period, $324,900. Now, we can talk about a 30-year term because we're not borrowing short-term. That rate we would get today about 3.20. Level debt service of about $148,800. 8 cents per $1,000 of value. Median house impact annually, $18,024. $18.24. Oh, I'm sorry, $18.24, sorry about that. Total debt service over the 30-year period, the town would pay $1,633,120. That's $1.3 million more over a 20-year period. It's a lot of money. Pros and cons, 10-year term, just like the other schedule, lower interest rate over the 30-year. Higher cost, it's a con, per $1,000 of value. Lower debt service interest paid. Once again, we retire the debt ASAP, and that would be better for our debt profile overall. 30-year term, higher interest rate versus a 10-year. It'd be a lower cost because of the term, per $1,000 of value. Higher debt service interest paid. This would be under the maximum term allowed, 30 years. And this would be an increase of our debt burden as a percentage of total general fund expenditures. That's how they evaluate our debt burden. How much debt are we paying as it compares to our total general fund expenditures? And these are the corresponding schedules for what information I just gave you. So as you can see, the 10-year bond issue, no gift, $2,865,000. Total interest paid, $324,900. Estimated rate of 2%. 30-year bond issue, no gift, $2,865,000. Estimated rate 3.20. Total interest over the 30-year period, $1,633,120. The next page is really a modification of the original proposals we put out there. We've had extensive discussions with our financial advisor over several funding options. This one seems to make the most sense. This one would save the taxpayers the most money. What this plan would do is immediately would go out, this is with the gift, this immediately would go out and ban $1 million. Instead of banning 2.8, we ban 1 million. And we keep that ban alive for a period of 4 years, recognizing that the pay-down option would reduce that ban every year by $250,000 until year 4. At the same time, in year 1, we would go out and permanently bond $1.865 million at a low rate that we know we can get today. So we eliminate that risk by not relying on converting that ban in year 4. As a result of that, we still pay $211,400, but we significantly reduce our ban interest over that same period of time, and we pay both over a 10-year period. So we retire that ban in 4 years, we retire our debt in 10. Unlike option 1 and option 2, we actually pay that over a 14-year period. We pay a ban for 4 years, then we pay debt for 10, a total of 14 years. So, under option 1, we were paying $177,000 in ban interest. Under this option, we pay $37,500. And the final option that has been suggested is to use a combination of free cash, stabilization, and excess levy. Our free cash balance that was certified by DOI that we presented to the Finance Committee is $6,189,067. Our stabilization account as of today, or 11/3, would be $2,048,189. And we have excess levy that was certified, not certified, but was presented last night. It becomes certified once DOR signs off on it. Puts that excess levy at $3,350,403.52. I can tell you, and I think we've made a commitment through our financial policies and through our presentations at town meeting, that it was our, through our efforts over the last several years, 4 to 5 years, that we build up our reserves and attempt to get a bond rating upgrade. As you are well aware, we got a positive outlook by Moody's Financial Services on a rating review that we had for our bond issue on September 2nd, was $16.4 million of permanent bonding, as well as 11.2 of short-term borrowing to meet our middle school obligations, as well as our FY15 capital. We've stayed the course. This ship has been sailing for a while. We can finally see land. We want to bring it home to port. We know on our positive outlook that if we continue the trend, and through discussions we have with our financial advisor, that it's imminent. I can tell you any utilization of free cash stabilization may jeopardize that positive outlook. I, for one, as a financial watchdog for the town, cannot recommend use of those funds. I can tell you that use of excess levy would be permissible and probably would not hurt our positive outlook. But that comes with consequences as well. That would result in a tax rate increase of significant magnitude if a large sum of money were to be levied in year 1 or applied against the total commitment of this $2.865 million. So, Madam Chair, I think that concludes, at least on the funding option side, what we have prepared and presented, not only to you, but to the Board of Selectmen and the general, and to the residents of Auburn as well. Be happy to answer any questions regarding any one of those funding options this time, if the Finance Committee sees fit to do so at this time.
Questions?
All my questions actually come before even talking about borrowing or any type of, how we do bonding, how many years and everything like that. I guess I want to know a little bit more about what this whole project is about. And I apologize, I did not see the selectmen's meeting. And I don't know if you can go through a quick presentation about this. I mean, you know, we're talking about property that's probably assessed at a fraction of this. And what does this developer want to do with this land? And is there any plans on the table of what they want to do with it? I mean, I guess I want to know the pros and cons of actually allowing the builder to go ahead with it, or the town buying the land, because I know we have first right of refusal on just that one parcel. The other one, the 250,000, is, for all practical purposes, going to be developed, whether we buy the land or not, the other parcel of land. So I guess those are the questions that I have before we even get into bonding. I kind of want to know what the pros and cons of the town getting involved in this at all.
Through the chair, if I may, I'll try to be brief with the answer,
Yep,
because I
no, I know.
know this is a really complex process, so I'll try to respond to your questions. First of all, with the process is that the seller is required to notify the town when they're selling land. And as Ed mentioned, they provide a notification to the town, and that contains the two PNSs, and the town is required to purchase the land at the 61A land, if they choose to exercise their option, at the $2.865 million. The buyer actually has little to no role in a 61A process. It's the seller's notification to the town. The seller is required to tell the town only what is the proposed change of use from agricultural to X, and what is the purchase, include a copy of the purchase and sale agreement, identify the parcels to be sold, and identify a map that shows what those parcels are. And it is required to be sent to certain agents of the town. So the developer, or the buyer in this case, who also is a developer, is not required to provide anything as part of the process, but did come in mid-October to present to the board their, I would say, their conceptual plan for the process. There is no plan on the table per se. There's no definitive plan. There's no site plan. There's a conceptual plan that the developer has presented to the board. And I want to make it clear, it's conceptual. The developer said it was conceptual, and the developer said it was premature to make any final decisions. They're still in the process of deciding what to do. The land that is under the PNS, under the 61A parcels, there are what you call Phase 1 and Phase 2. Phase 1 was approximately 25 lots in Phase 1, 21 of which are under 61A. So 21 of the lots in Phase 1 that was approved decades ago is 61A, and that's on South Hill Road. Then on South Hill Meadow Road, there are 13 lots, and that was an approved subdivision, approved by the planning board, and went through the Conservation Commission in 2010. So the total amount of lots, and this isn't homes, again, this is lots, under the 61A was, 34. There would be 34 lots in 61A, and 33. And then the remainder were the additional lots that were under the second PNS that are not part of the 61A. The valuation, to answer your question on the valuation, the assessed valuation, the assessor has a formula that she has to follow, and that's set forth by the Department of Revenue. And under that formula, when she assessed it as residential property, so in other words, if it were to be purchased right now and for use as residential property, come out of 61A, that value was a little bit over $1.8 million for those parcels.
Okay, just stop you right there for a second. So it's not assessed at, right now, it's not assessed at that much. This is just conceptual if there was residential
Well, through the
homes on
chair,
that
right now,
lot?
it's under 61A. So under 61A, it's under a different classification. So it gets a different valuation that's put on it because it's under 61A agricultural. If it was not 61A agricultural and that was taken off, that classification was taken off and reverted back to residential, it would be assessed at 1.8.
Okay.
And I should say, in a sale of the land to, not to the town, obviously, because we're tax exempt, but a sale of the land to any other party, any 61A land, the seller of the land is required to pay the town back a rollback tax. The rollback tax on this is approximately $90,000, and that's for the years that it's been under protection of 61A, which is a temporary, not a permanent protection. It's not a conservation restriction, it's a temporary protection. So then, that would be the approximate value as assessed as residential. And that's again, it was around 49 acres, a little over 49, I think 49.39, but the valuation of the land, again, according to DOR, there's a formula that you use, it's valued at, I think, $75,000 the first acre, and then a certain percentage after that is about $317,000 if the land were to be classified right now, today, as open space. And again, that's assessed values. And I know there's been a lot of conversation in public meetings about assessed value versus market value. We were asked to provide what the assessed value is, and that's what we're doing. Clearly, you can see the market value, it's what someone is willing to pay, but that's not, right now, the assessed value. And what someone's willing to pay for it right now is for residential land, not for open space, which is why the board asked us to provide the valuations. The plans on the table right now are just concept. The buyer, Scott Sundin with Tiltime in Holden, has come into the Board of Selectmen. Again, I just want to make it clear, a lot of people are concerned because he didn't come in and present a plan and wasn't definitive, and we don't really know. But under the 61A process, he's not required to do it. The seller is required to notify the town. The buyer doesn't need to do anything other than to say that they're signed on the bottom line on PNS.
But the land is zoned for either agriculture or residential?
The land is zoned residential, it's RB, which is residential, but it's classified as agriculture under a certification process that the owner goes through every year with the assessor's office. So yes, it is residential land. And in the notification, they're required to tell us what the change of use will be from agricultural to X, and X was identified as residential land.
Now, when we talk agriculture, it's just really open space. It's just, is it being
Under the
used?
law, the owner is required to do some sort of farming on the land to
Okay.
get the agricultural exemption.
Okay, but there's nothing industrial or anything like that can be done with that property. It's either houses, can it be zoned for condominiums and stuff like that, or do we know that?
I would have to go back and check under the our RB zoning, but I can
Okay.
tell you that the developer has proposed to likely, he didn't say he definitely would, but he said he likely would, so, I would have to think that that's the direction he's going in, to look at developing phase one into 25 single-family homes, as already approved. And then he indicated to the board that phase two, that's already approved for 13 homes, that he would be looking to revamp the phase two plan and potentially put in an apartment complex
Okay.
that he said would mirror something similar to what he did in Holden. And they were very clear the night they came to the board, they have not made any decisions on numbers or layout, they just said everything's a concept, and they showed the layout of the potential buildings. The project he's referring to in Holden has 192 units. It's my understanding it was originally proposed for 243. The developer went through the LIP process, which is a local initiative program, which is a way, it's a different mechanism for getting through affordable housing under Chapter 40B. And the developer told the board that evening that he would be potentially interested, if that's the direction he goes, to work with the board on an LIP project as opposed to what you consider a straight comprehensive permit under 40B. Comprehensive permit being you can go in and pretty much do whatever you want through the zoning. LIP process, the town has more ability to negotiate, and that is what he explained happened in Holden. They started at 243 units and they ended up at 192. He was asked how many units and was not able to say that yet. I can't speak for the developer,
No,
other
I
than to say the
understand
developer
that.
wasn't ready to make that commitment. He was asked what types of restrictions would be on it, and he explained that under affordable 40B, a minimum of 25% of the units are set aside for affordable, which is 80% of median income for that community. The Holden project, he did not exceed the 25%. It's a minimum of 25, and he is at 25%. So 75% is market rate, 25% is affordable. Affordable in Holden, looking at their numbers and what they're renting those units for, was, I believe, $1,150 for a one-bedroom, up to maybe $1,350 for a three-bedroom, somewhere in that range. And then the market rate were around $1,800.
What phase is that project in Holden? Is it
It's
near completion? or-
probably 85% complete.
And we don't know of any problems that they've had with the builder itself? Because, believe me, developers scare me. Because they come and go, some of them don't finish their work, some of them file bankruptcy, and the project is just left to stagnant. And
No.
that's the biggest fear I have with anybody who wants to, put up 40 houses or 50 houses. That's my biggest concern.
You know, through the chair, obviously, I don't want to speak where I shouldn't be speaking, but
No,
I can
I
tell you
understand.
what we heard from our looking into this, that the town of Holden, the officials in Holden said that the developer was very responsible and
Okay.
good to work with. It was a several-year process. It was a
Okay.
long process because there was a lot of negotiation. We've spoken to the planner, the growth management, and the assessor, and also the developer has been very good to work with. We were also told, and I can only tell you what we were told, I
Sure.
can't prove this, but that a number of people who moved into the units were actually people who lived in the single-family homes around that area, who saw the opportunity to downsize when they no longer needed 3- and 4-bedroom homes, and downsized and moved into those units. I can't speak to anything other than what we have been told. Our police chief reached out to their police chief, our fire chief reached out to their fire chief. And the fire chief said there were no significant impacts. I believe they had an additional 11 calls in approximately a year period. And I believe many of those were due to the construction, some potential accidents that happened during construction, not necessarily calls after the construction was completed. The buildings are not all complete. The police do believe that there was an increase in calls, and based on the formulas that the Holden police used to determine what their impacts are, our police did the same formulas, and then we did a second set of formulas for impacts to see what would happen, and we're between 1 and maybe 1 1/4 additional officers that may be required if a development like that goes in.
Did we get any type of projections of, if these houses all went in, and it's a big if they all went in, what potential revenue the town would be bringing in?
Through the chair, I apologize, I did not bring it with me this evening, and I'm happy to get it to you, but we did do an analysis of that, and I can tell you just from the top of my head what I recall from all of that. We did an analysis of what the potential taxes would be. And again, this is, I want to be very clear on this. We have to make a lot of assumptions to do this.
Absolutely.
We don't know that there's 192 units. So
Yep.
what we did is we took an average, we said, okay, let's say it's the project in Holden, because that's what the developer said it might
Yep.
be. So we said 190 units. We got a hold of the impact analysis from Holden. We looked at how they did their impact analysis. Based on their impact analysis and what they came up with for a formula for what the construction costs would be, which then drive your building permit costs and other things, it looks like, if it's built the same way, and again, we don't know if it's going to be built the same way, it would be about a $23 million project. And I want to be clear again, the other huge piece here that we don't know, and we can only go by what the developer said that evening, is we don't know how many 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms there are. And that's a major factor. In Holden, we based our analysis on the Holden model. So we did 128 2 bedrooms, I think 51 bedrooms and 10 3 bedrooms. And it pretty much mirrored the breakdown of what they had done in Holden. And again, that could be off because there's no saying that the developer won't come in and say, we're going to do all 3-bedroom units. And that's why I want to be cautious. They could come in and say, we're doing all 1-bedroom units, we're going to come in and do all 3 bedrooms. So we just mirrored it on Holden. Based on that, Then we had to do a tax impact, and again, that, we're
Mm-hmm.
just looking at what kind of taxes would we bring in if it was indeed valued at 23 million. We don't know that, we don't know the quality of the construction, the type of construction, there are no plans yet. So purely using an assumption model that Holden used, and based on what the developer said he may do, we had come up with an analysis. And that analysis included a projection on the schools, and that I will admittedly say that is a hot button, it's a hot topic, and people will find fault or find a different way to calculate things. That's fine. The reality is you can't calculate it out completely. You're not going to be able to do that without a plan on the table. But what we looked at was the formula that Holden used, which was a UMass Donahue Institute multiplier figure for an apartment complex, and there are multipliers that are used for the 1-bedroom, the 2-bedroom, and the 3-bedroom. And based on that, they calculate out how many children there are going to be in a unit like that, school-age children. It is definitely, it's using a multiplier, and it's using a formula that may or may not be correct, but it is a commonly used formula in other communities. That is what Holden used. To try to get a different perspective, we used that model, and then we used another model, and it was another federal model from a National Association of Apartment. It was a large group, and they do a lot of calculations, and their modeling actually came out a little higher. So using the Holden model, which was UMass Donahue, it was about 40 children between the 25 homes and the apartments. And using the national indicator model, that was closer to 70. The school department here, business manager, contacted the business manager out at Northampton because they have a completed, finished 205-unit apartment complex. They said that they had an increase of 45 students, definitive increase of 45 students. So we figured the model, it's close, and could it be off? Absolutely. No one's saying it's not, because again, we don't know how many units there are, we don't know how many, what the phasing is, how long it's going to take this. We don't know if these units are going to be done in 1 year, or they're going to be done in 10 years. When are these students coming in? And then the hardest part is to then say, what is the impact on the school? And I know that's a major question, and we're doing our best to give you all information, but we will tell you, we don't know the ages of the children that are moving in. We don't know the rooms, we don't know that yet. So we can take the model and say, spread it out over K through 3, that's 13 grades, and come up with an average amount of students per grade. Is it going to be exactly spread across the grades? Of course it's not. But I can't sit here and tell you that they're all going to be in kindergarten or first grade, or they're all going to be in high school. That remains to be seen. If it is in middle school or high school, the school can absorb the additional 3 to 5 students in a grade. If it's in the lower grades, it would be difficult to absorb 3 to 5 kids in some of the grades. So then we took the cost to the town after the state reimbursement, so the cost to the town for educating students, a little shy of under $13,000, the total cost. After state reimbursement comes out to about $6,300 a student. We multiplied that by the minimum of the 40 students, and came up with an average cost, I believe it was about $240,000 cost to the schools annually, based on what it costs per student. But again, we have to also say that cost per student could be less than that per student, because if you put 3 or 2 children in one grade, it's not necessarily going to cost you another $12,000. It may cost you $500, but you may pick up an extra cost if you put 6 children in one grade, and you need more than just books and you need more desks. So all we can do is take general numbers and take the cost per student times the potential students. When we did all of that, and when we looked at the impacts, we looked at the annual revenues that would come into the town, we looked at the one-time revenues that would come into the town, the annual expenses of the town, it came out that potentially the town could end up on the positive as opposed to in the negative. And again, it is pure assumption, and I don't want anyone to ever say we said it was going to be different,
and
it's
I
not. It
appreciate
could be
getting the
different.
information. I guess I want to find out at what point did we take the jump from whether this project is going to be beneficial, or whether we want to keep it open space, to going through all of these models of borrowing. And I don't know, is this something that the selectmen want to do? Is this something that they say they want to get this open space, they do not want a development? Is it something that administration has made a decision that they would rather go this route than having the developer come in and build houses. That's where I'm trying to figure out where the leap came from, because we've gone past the point of, do we want this or we don't want this? We're saying, we do want it, we do want the open land, and let's figure out a way to pay for it.
Through the chair, I think the best way to answer that question is for me to explain the process on the 61A and what town council has recommended. There's a 120-day due diligence period for the town. They have to make their decision by December 9th. Town council, you have to have a public hearing. We wanted to make sure we had as much information as we could. Obviously, this process continues every day. We find new information because we have not stopped doing our research on it.
Okay.
In anticipation of potentially taking the vote to exercise their option to purchase, the Board of Selectmen had to call a town meeting. They couldn't wait until December 9th to call a town meeting and then take a vote, because they cannot take a vote to exercise their option to purchase if they don't have the authority to fund the purchase. So town meeting has to vote to provide the money before they can take any vote. So that's why the town meeting had to be scheduled prior to their vote. It was scheduled in enough time prior to the time they needed their vote to allow for all of the legal terms for challenges on town meeting votes, so that they could still end up taking their vote without giving up the 120-day time period.
Okay, so this is not making a final decision.
Correct, that decision
One way or
has
the
not
other.
been made yet. I will tell you though, and Ed can correct me, at the meeting the other night, the Board of Selectmen did take a vote to recommend the article on, that as it currently appears on the town meeting.
But the article doesn't really say anything. It's saying that we have the ability to borrow if we decide to.
Right, through the chair, the article was worded so that there were still options as to what the final cost would be and what the mechanism for providing the money would be. So that then led to the question, to answer your question, how do we get to this point? Then the board said to us, can you provide us with the financial models and what the options are for us to consider? Because to go into town meeting with no concept, you have to go in with an understanding of what your options are and what your recommendations are going to be. The board has not taken their vote yet on what their recommended option would be. And I want to be clear, there's different votes that they're taking. They have been advised strongly by town council not to take a vote yet on the position as to whether they will exercise or waive their right. That cannot happen until after town meeting. They've also been advised to keep the public hearing open. The public hearing should be open until after the town meeting vote, because there still has to be dialogue after the town meeting vote about what is the next step. And maybe it will be very clear after town meeting, and maybe it won't. So the public hearing remained open.
I hate to just take up all this time, but my other question is, who makes that final decision? Is it the board?
Through the chair, under 61A, the Board of Selectmen makes the final decision.
Okay, so it's not anything that's
And
done.
that is why they're having the open hearings, so they
Okay.
can solicit input. That's why they're advised not to take any position until that process is over. It is a long process, and we fully recognize it's frustrating to people, and, residents want a decision now, and we understand it, and the board understands it, but in the best interest of the town, we've got to follow the process that's laid out by the law, and the law is you do have the 120 days, and it's being used because on a daily basis, an issue is raised, and that's the good part about a public hearing. People do come in with questions, and they have the right to ask the questions and to get the information, and you don't want to do that in 2 weeks and make a decision. Had that happened in 2 weeks when no one had any information, anyway, it takes too long to get it, the town may have made a decision that they regret making because they didn't have all the information. So waiting as long as you can to make sure you have all the information is the right thing for the town to do, as frustrating as it can be.
So when is that final decision have to be made?
Technically, under the law, it's December 10th, but there have to be certifications and letters that are filed with the registry, and so really, at the very latest, the board should take their vote on December 9th, if
Okay.
not a little bit before that. When they take that vote, they also have to have a purchase and sale prepared to attach to should they decide to exercise their option. I just want to add, and if it's okay, one thing to the Finance Committee through the chair. The three options that are in front of the Board of Selectmen under the 61A process are to exercise your right of first refusal, to waive your right of first refusal, which means the purchase and sales goes forward, as is between the developer, buyer and the seller, or to assign your right of first refusal. And we did look into the assignment immediately. Within a week of getting this, we had already had a couple of conversations and meetings with assignment. We continue to have them. Assigning means the town could assign their right of first refusal to a not-for-profit organization like a land trust, who would be willing to take on the purchase of the land. And they could then work with the town to sell back some of it to the town, but they would have to retain 70% of it as conservation if you had an assignee. The problem that we ran into with that is we went to all the appropriate agencies that would do the assignee. We reached out to the state. They reached out to the state. They looked at this, and no one was in the financial position to take on a $3 million sale. So even if we found an organization that's willing to assign it, they also need to be able to pay $3 million up front. The value to a town of assigning it is it gives the town additional time to come up with the money. And then ultimately, they pay the full value and get the land back. So it can be a placeholder for the town, but an organization still needs to have the $3 million in hand to close in 90 days. And we've worked with the Greater Worcester Land Trust. We met with them again today, in another conversation today, just trying to make sure that we've explored all of our avenues. We've explored all of our avenues that we can right now for grant funding. The problem is the grant funding, for the grant that we would be eligible for, the application process is in June, with decisions that are generally made in November, December, although with the change in administration, it's anticipated it might not be made until the following January. So we're into another fiscal year and potentially another calendar year. We don't have an organization who's willing to take on the whole of this land for a year, over a year, until the town may get a grant. The maximum grant that you could get would be $400,000. They're competitive grants, and we've been told that given the value of the land on a per acre basis, we may not be in a competitive position to get that grant. So I wanted to be clear to the board. We continue to look at a different way to fund this. We're trying everything we can, uncovering every rock to see if there are other funding sources that are out there, so that when the board has to make their decision, as you said, how did they get here? They need to have all the information they can. They need the pros, the cons. They need what the impacts are, what the impacts are not. They need to know what their financing structures are. There's so much information that needs to be provided. And I think, I think we would go on record as saying the 61A process needs to be revised on the state level. It is not enough time for a community, especially a community that has a town meeting versus a city council in a city that meets every week.
Yeah.
Pardon me. It's a compressed time frame to do a lot of due diligence. And I think the process needs to be revamped on the state level. That being said, the process is what it is, and we are doing everything we can within the process. I think Ed and I have talked about numerous things that we want to take on now that this has hit. So in the future, hopefully we won't have to face this type of thing, and we can go back to the master plan, go to the current open space plan, and start looking at some creative strategies for maybe dealing with this type of thing in the future. But right now, this is the process, and we are following the process, we're doing everything within the process, and there's a lot of moving parts.
Madam Chair, if I could ask one more question, and
then
I'll be quiet.
Okay, all right.
If, at the final decision, they decide to not exercise, then this article really is a moot point.
Through the chair, yes, the board could vote to waive their option. They could vote to do that prior to the town meeting vote or after the town meeting vote. But what they can't do is vote to exercise their option until after the town meeting.
So there wouldn't be any borrowing if they just,
The authorization would sit out there, and we'd have to rescind it,
I'll be quiet now.
Okay.
Or-
okay. Yeah.
or any other funding mechanism.
Yeah. Ed? Yeah.
Through the chair, I have a what-if question. I hate what-if questions, but I sat through the 3 meetings. Now, when we heard Jim, who's probably one of the more knowledgeable guys in town in terms of what's going on, wasn't really aware of the project. The thing I'm a little concerned about is, I'm a town meeting member, and I got my letter. A lot of people I used to have a town meeting certain times of the year. I almost threw the letter away because I kind of thought it was just something, whatever. So if we don't get a quorum next Tuesday night, is there a process in place that it would be the next night?
It would be the next,
Okay.
it would be the next night, or it would be the following night. That,
Okay.
spoken to the town clerk about that. And we, the town clerk will say, because she is the one who puts this together, uses the code red with all the. town
Okay,
meeting
I was gonna
notices.
ask that too.
So she get that message out ahead of time and as well as on that evening.
Okay. And then one other quick question, on the article, I know you mentioned it's, kind of open, but at town meeting, do the town meeting members make the decision that we recommend we approve this, but we want option 3? Or is it more just we recommend that we exercise the option, then the Board of Selectmen will make the final call on the funding?
Well, first of all, the Board of Selectmen will take a position relative to this article in terms of funding. That will go to the town meeting. Certainly, if it is done through a loan authorization, they can say that they support an option, but I don't think it can become part of the article, because things do change. I can tell you that this legislation, recent legislation that allowed for a borrowing of a term of up to 30 years, where before it was 20 years. So there are always things that could change from day to day, all depending on what comes out of the legislature. So I don't know. I don't know what the end result is going to be. But if it is an authorization, it wouldn't specify an option. Certainly, we could convey to town meeting members what the more favorable option would be.
Okay.
But my guess is it wouldn't be tied into the actual article itself.
No, I think that's good, because you present some good options here, and I would hate for maybe somebody to get up and, really kind of sell, to go one way or the other, and it's probably not the best way, and then they convince enough people to vote, and then we don't make the right decision.
Because between the time town meeting acts and maybe before we go to market, there may be another creative way of approaching this thing. So we want to keep our options open, but this is the best information we have at this time.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. This option here, is this a number to it? Is this option 3? I was looking for a number.
Well, I didn't put a number to it only because the ones that are numbered actually went out on the website as is. So, I mean, if you want to call it option 4, we call it option 4 for purposes of reference.
Okay. And what's the, I was looking for, what's the impact to the households? In other words, you
It would,
provided us,
on a permanent bonding, it would be the same as,
and I'm talking the 10-year model.
okay,
I just didn't see that here, just,
it would be the same as option 2. $211,400, level debt service, $205,600.
and how much would that directly cost the
It would
the
be
average?
10 cents per thousand, roughly $22.80 per house valued at $227,980. Now, I want to make it clear, you can go out for a term of 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. We did the high, we did the low, and so in increments of 5 years, you can, I mean, it's going to fall somewhere in between those values.
Okay, sorry, I got a few more.
Yeah.
Does a rating agency consider open space an asset? A town asset? So this one, I'm sorry, let me clarify my question. So this could not potentially benefit us, as far as improving our rating by having additional assets on our books, is what I'm kind of leading on to.
No, the ratings are statistically driven. They look at Auburn's profile as it compares to, say, other A2 communities. I can tell you our level of reserves, it's called assigned and unassigned fund balance. They put a percentage of total expenditures, and they do a comparison with other communities. Ours is about 14%, 13 to 14%. They're telling us that needs to be higher in order for us to ascertain a higher rating. Based upon our budgetary techniques and our history that we've been trending over the last several years, leads them to believe, and that's why we got a positive outlook, that we would maintain our reserves And our undesignated fund balance would continue to grow based upon our conservative approach in the way we budget. For instance, our free cash grew from 4 million to 6 million, from 13 to 14 because of our closeouts. Based upon our credibility with the rating agencies, our financial strategic plan that was adopted by the Finance Committee, as well as the Board of Selectmen, lead them to believe, through discussions we had with them, that we would be looking at similar results for FY15. And based upon that, they gave us a positive outlook. Unlike what we heard the other night, that positive outlook does not remain for 365 days. It remains for a 2-year period. It can be pulled at any time, but they have to take action on that positive look within 2 years.
2 years, okay. We hadn't talked about it tonight, is there anything else? Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
I don't know if you had, is there anything else you adding on to the point, or?
No, we did put some comments on that final option. And we provided you with both the rating agency reports, both by Standard & Poor's and by Moody's. I would strongly suggest that you look at those comments, but these are excerpts of those comments from those recent reports. And we were rated the way we were rated because of our strengths in financial management. And our continued commitment to grow. It's very simple. We stay the course, we're gonna get an upgrade. If somehow we slip and erode some of our reserves, my professional opinion, that positive outlook would evaporate and we would wipe the slate clean and have to start all over again. Remember, that positive outlook is in place because of a history that we've demonstrated with them. This would undo all of that, those years of hard work.
The other questions in regard to the $1 million gift or whatever. What are the specifically the conditions for us accepting the gift?
The donors have indicated that if the town accepts the gift for $1 million and purchases the land under the 61A notification, so all the land that's purchased, that's close to 50 acres, would have to remain as open space for conservation and preservation purposes. Passive recreation would be allowed, walking trails, hiking trails, hopefully connections to other open space land at the Pappas complex, and maybe the expansion of those trails might work. There is a approximately 10 to 15 foot sliver that connects the two parcels together, so you could have some type of trail system in there. But the condition is that the town would not be able to sell or lease any of the land for non-conservation purposes. And the question was specifically asked, would the town be able to put it out to an RFP for farming? And the donors said, no, that is not, the intent isn't to have someone there farming the land, the intent is to have the land for preservation of its natural habitat.
Is that for pretty much forever, too?
It's in perpetuity, yes.
It's in perpetuity, okay.
And if I can, I just want to clarify one thing too, when Ed just made, Mr. Kavanaugh made the statement, you know, that this, we feel all of our hard work would be in jeopardy. I just want to make it clear, and I think he did, but that is not, we're not saying that that would be the case with the borrowing. But we're saying that that is the case of the utilization of our reserves. So I just want to be clear, the utilization of the reserves is a critical piece here. So we're not recommending not to do this. I want to be clear, you know, that is not what we're saying. What we're saying is, if the town wants to, the board wants to exercise their option, then it's our responsibility to advise them from a financial perspective of what's in the best fiscal health for the entire, the CFO. Ed and our financial advisors are very concerned about the reduction in reserves. And again, I want to be clear, that is not to say that they're concerned about the borrowing. The borrowing would be a concern if we did it out over probably longer than 10 years, because then you're changing your debt levels.
And I can tell you that these comments, not only coming from town administration, but we had extensive discussions with our financial advisors who also agree with our read on this as well. So it's not to say, and I want to make it clear, we're not saying you can't use free cash. I'm going to tell you right now, the use of free cash and the use of stabilization would not result in a tax rate increase. It would be tax neutral. Excess levy equals tax rate increase, and there's been a suggestion of using excess levy. I was criticized the other night for sitting on $6.1 million of free cash. We've been given direction by the Finance Committee, as well as the Board of Selectmen, to stay the course by the adoption of those financial policies. And those financial policies have been accepted, well embraced by the financial rating agencies. It went a long way in us getting this positive outlook, because the town did not have those financial policies for years. That basically sets a roadmap for the town. And as a individual who in town administration has been involved in this for some period of time, all that hard work would be thrown right out the window. Why jeopardize the potential of bond upgrade that's going to benefit the taxpayers of this community for future borrowings, all future borrowings?
Ed?
Just had a question on the open space. You probably don't have to have an answer, but just kind of, I thought about it when I took a jog down there. It's kind of nice land. When you have open space, do you also have to do any type of upgrades in terms of making the access road accessible with parking for residents that want to get down there? Or, I don't know, in terms of, because right now if someone goes down there, if you try to drive down there, you probably damage your vehicle.
Through the chair, there's no requirement to do that. With the Pappas complex, obviously, there's a lot of parking because
Yeah.
there's active recreation there. There are fields, you have to get people in and out. With passive recreation, you're not required to put in any kind of parking.
Okay.
Which is why when we were looking at it, they would make the connection of the trails from the Pappas area where there's plenty of parking and make the walking trails take you through to that area, so you're not looking at having to put in a parking lot on that spot.
Chris?
Just on a comment to you, Ed, this committee, and I'll be, speaking for myself, we wouldn't appreciate your holding the line with the financial policies, and we see the benefit. So, this board, I mean, I'm speaking for at least me, but we wouldn't object to that, so keep it up.
Right.
One more thing, I know this more because at the end of my parents' street, there's 1,000 acres of open space farmland. So knowing that, there are other pieces of this. What else is out there? I mean, potentially if that developer wants to come to town, couldn't he or they go someplace else and do this exact same thing again? So what else is out there? Do we have any other exposures?
Through the chair, I'm happy to answer that, and I want to preface it because of some of the comments that came in. At one of the meetings, someone stated that they felt that our responses were a threat. And I want to say right now, this is not a threat. This is just an answer to your question. Yes, a developer could come in. What size project would they propose? Depends on the site. They could go on a private lot, they could go on a public lot. A publicly owned lot, they could go on, a 61A lot. So there are opportunities. It is not a threat. It hasn't happened yet. So we're not saying it's imminently going to happen. But to answer your question, yeah, it could happen. We did an open space update this year. In 2011, we appointed an open space committee. And for 2.5 years, the committee identified through the CMRPC and with several public meetings in town here, and going to all the boards and commissions in town that were affected by this, developed an open space plan that we submitted to the state in June. That open space plan does have several maps in it, and it's online, and you can see on those maps what land is 61A, what's 61B, which is forestry, what's in permanent conservation protection, and you can actually see some of the open space that's not under any kind of protected land. I know there is I believe a 300 lot subdivision that was approved on Lester Rochester Street several years ago. That's still sitting vacant. The land off of Kelly Street's about 302 acres.
It goes more.
That's 61A land. That also is actually connected to land over in Oxford. That particular land was identified in what we call the Central 13 prioritization project. which we participated in for the last 2 years with CMRPC. It's a regional project where we identified lands for preservation and lands for development. That land was identified as a regional preservation, definitely local, and I believe it was also, I don't want to say for sure, but I believe it's also identified as a regional preservation priority, not just local, because of the size of it. Could a developer come in on a private lot? You know, absolutely, under 40B, that's, you know, they can come in and have certain zoning variances and setbacks and things waived under a 40B. So it could happen. I don't want to tell you what the chances are of it happening. It hasn't happened to date. It could happen on a smaller level. It could go in on a 2 or 3 lot subdivision where they decide to put in a small complex. Just so you know, the town is at about approximately 3% of affordable housing under DHCD. And as long as we are under 10%, we are vulnerable, per se, to 40B developments. And there are 2 different kinds of 40B developments. There's the what you call the hostile 40B, where a developer just comes in and says, this is what I'm doing, and you're stuck with it. And then there's the LIP, where a developer comes in and says, I'd like to work with you to come up with a project that benefits everybody. Either one could happen in town, wherever there's the opportunity, but a developer would still have to find a site that has the appropriate utilities and access, and there are still all the issues the developer has to deal with, but yes, it could happen.
One last question. You mentioned the Board of Selectmen has the ultimate final approval of the app. So what's going to happen at town meeting? What's the vote? What's the intention of the vote?
It would be to either appropriate or authorize a sum of money to meet the town's obligation to purchase this land if the Board of Selectmen exercise their option to purchase. Without that in place, they don't have the money to make that vote.
So they're going to recommend a funding option ultimately, and then the board
The Board of
will
Selectmen will
decide
take a
whether to take a
position
position.
on this article and how to fund this article. Either through a borrowing or either through a combination of free cash, stabilization, excess levy, all of one, some of one, combination of the 3, I don't know.
So town meeting is ultimately, they're not going to make a decision whether to buy or not to buy the land.
Correct.
Okay, that's a
Their
key
authority does
distinction.
not rest with them. I mean, in essence, what they're saying is we're putting up the money that will allow the board to make a decision.
Here's a check, you decide to fill in or not. Got it.
Well, if town meeting voted not to authorize the appropriation, then they would be saying, no, you can't do it, in effect.
Well,
But they can't say yes.
Once they vote yes, now they're obligated, they don't have the ability to write out that check.
yeah, I made the analogy is that here, they're deciding to give you a check or not to give you a check, and then the board will decide to sign it or not to sign it, essentially. Thank you very much.
Through the chair, should we be making a recommendation on what we think is a good financing option, or is that not something?
I think your recommendation, town meeting will be looking for as well. I think any article that has to do with funding, the Finance Committee always takes a position on that.
Yes, sir.
Will there be a dollar figure on this article, or is it just gonna be?
Yes, one way or another, even with the gift in play, we have to come up with $2,865,000 within 90 days.
So that's the sum of money.
If it is a borrowing, it would have to be the gross amount. Even though we would be bonding less, and I'll make that analogous to the school, Auburn Middle School project. Even though the state is participating roughly 58% state share, the authorization has to be for the full value of the project, which is $44.5 million.
Oh, I was gonna say, are we having a meeting before town meeting?
We will. Yep.
And this article be clarified, or with the actual dollar figure on it?
Well, one way or another, it will either raise through appropriation or borrow $2,865,000.
Chris?
Sorry, we could recommend an option without recommending yes or no, because Kevin's not gonna vote, so it's just gonna be either the four of us, and I know we'd have to all agree based on,
Well, we have a quorum here, yeah.
I know, so we potentially could recommend an option.
Yes.
I mean, I know we could do it at another town meeting, I don't know what's gonna change, but from what I'm hearing tonight, if we could recommend either, I'm gonna say 1, 2, 3, or 4 options that were presented us tonight. Without taking a position saying to buy the land, but we could recommend an option, is that,
I would approach it this way. I would either look at it as a straight borrowing without tying any option to it, because like I said, it's our job to make sure that we bond it in the most efficient and prudent way. And those things could change. That's why I don't want to tie it to an option. Right now, the preferred option would be number 4. That makes the most sense. But like I said, I don't want to put an option to it. When town meeting, if it is done through a borrowing, they authorize a borrowing of $2.865 million, and that's it. It's up to town administration to structure that in such a way that benefits the town. Based upon term, based upon ban versus bond. Well, there are a lot of moving pieces here.
I'm just looking for, what, I'm talking to the committee here.
Well, I have a couple of questions, so who makes the final decision? You make the final decision then, whether we make a 10-year term or 26-year term, under the direction of the selectmen, or what?
Well, here's how it works. Town meeting never puts a term on any borrowing.
Right.
What we do is we look at the items that are required under a borrowing, and we look at the allowable term and structure our debt based upon that. For instance, schools could be for a term not to exceed 30 years. Our school borrowing is historically done at a 20-year. Because of the level of interest, because of the level of, and it's done through a debt exclusion. It makes sense, and we have our discussions with our financial advisors as well. But those items go to the board, and the board has to take a vote that, based upon what items are being purchased, that level of debt is retired over the first 5 years, or it's retired over 10 years, because some equipment, in accordance with municipal financing laws, sometimes you have to pay for that equipment within the first 5 years. So that's why the level of debt may change. You may pay more in the first 5 years because you have to pay off that equipment statutorily.
Gotcha, but when it comes to this, I mean, I guess my concern is these big terms, 26 years, 30 years, those have exorbitant interest rates that we'd have to pay in the end, I mean, almost.
Well, our recommendation of a borrowing would be option 4. We want to go out for the least amount of years that would allow for the least amount of interest paid.
Okay.
It makes sense because why pay $1.3 million more if you can retire that debt in a 10-year period?
And my other question is just to clarify, because we have this excess levy, of course, we don't have to raise any of this outside of our levy limit, so we don't have to go to the ballot for any Prop 2.5, or any borrowing outside that limit, correct? So we do not have to have an election, correct?
Well, I mean, quite honestly, that's an option that I think was brought up by a board member early on, that this possibly could go by way of debt exclusion vote. I don't believe that's being proposed. I don't know what may or may not come into play on the town meeting floor. No, but, you know, we can do that within the present levy that we
Right.
have. We can
Right.
raise those dollars.
Right. So it would seem excessive. It would just delay, I don't know how it would work with this whole process, if we have to know by December 9th. I mean, what would happen if we said yes, and then there was a vote at a ballot that said no? Well, we would still buy it because it's within our levy. All right. that's fine.
My guess is a purchase and sales agreement would have to be structured in such a way that it would be contingent upon a successful override vote.
Okay.
And we did not identify that as one of our funding mechanisms, although now that you raise it, it is an option.
So tonight, we're going to vote on to recommend a financing option, correct? And do we need to vote to recommend the article, like the Board of Selectmen did? Do you suggest that we do that tonight?
Well, you would probably either recommend or not recommend the article with I think, a consensus or a vote that it be done through the following financing option.
Okay,
Now, the Board of Selectmen's financing option may be different than what you're recommending, and
Right.
unfortunately, it's not worded in the article right now. The position the board takes would then include that financing option in the motion that would then go to the town meeting floor.
all right. So does anyone want to make a motion? Chris?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend option 4 to fund the town meeting warrant article. Is that?
Okay, so option 4, then the recommendation would be to fund this article through
The
through a
10-year,
bond- Through a bond authorization.
correct, the 10-year level debt bond, yes, 10 years.
No, second that.
Thank you. So the motion is to fund this article through a 10-year level debt bond. And we have a second. Any questions? More comments? Okay.
I have one more question.
Yeah?
I'm sorry, do we have anything, I know we've brought this up, is there anything coming off the books in the next 10 years that could, anything we've gone out to borrow? Large projects
I
or?
can tell you, we've been working very hard at working at our debt profile. I can tell you our 5-year capital plan shows that our requirement for funding our capital through bond proceeds is significantly being diminished going out 5 years. Remember, we do have an earmark of tax levy every year that's being applied towards our capital.
Yeah.
So we're making every effort to improve our debt burden as part of one of our financial strategies, which we will amend and bring to you sometime in early 2015.
Is the school coming off the books in 10 years, the school debt?
No, school debt will be coming off in 2024, the high school debt.
All right, how about Pappas then?
We just refinanced our high school bonds. We saved the town in excess of $3 million as a result of doing that. That's interest paid over the remaining 10 years of that debt. We also pay down on that debt based upon premiums we received that we put in reserve for the project, as well as some interest that we received from short-term bonds from the state.
So there's nothing directly coming off our books in the next 10 years that could potentially lower the impact to the homeowner?
Well, there's stuff
I know
coming
that.
off
I'm
all the
just-
time.
There's stuff falling
Yeah.
off. I don't want to say every year. I mean, I
Yeah.
do provide a debt schedule to you as part of the budget. So if you look at that debt schedule, you're seeing what we're retiring every year. So yes, that does become available either for future debt, or that may become available for other operational needs, or that may add to future excess levy.
All right, one last thing, and this is to my fellow board members. We're just taking a position on how to borrow the money. If they decide to, that's town meeting, so I think it's a good decision to make to at least come in with some sort of a recommendation.
Okay. Yes, sir?
I just had a question. I can't support, and just, I'm going to give a reason why I'm going to vote no on this. I can't support actually stating a borrowing mechanism because frankly, at this point, I'm not totally convinced that buying this land is the proper thing to do. And I know it will be decided upon by the Board of Selectmen. I just feel that if we recommend approval and state that we want to do it a certain way, to me, it almost gives an inkling that we're in favor of exercising our right to buy the property.
But my motion wasn't to recommend approval. My motion was to recommend a scenario to borrow. It wasn't to say yes to buy the land or not to buy the land. I'm not publicly stating to buy the land.
But
I'm
it's a
saying to you,
recommendation of the article as written in saying that it should be funded through option such and such. When the article is just asking simple, are we appropriating the possibility that we could borrow money if that is what's decided? I just hate to put another part on that.
I think that can be conveyed through your report to town meeting at the beginning of the meeting. That your vote simply provides money if the board should exercise their right to purchase.
I'm not coming out either way. I'm just saying, I think it's important that we have a recommendation of a funding option. Ultimately, we're not gonna be the ones that make that decision, and neither is town meeting. I just wanna make that clear to my board members here, it's the Board of Selectmen. And ultimately, I think they need to hear from us as the the overseers here. There's four of us, so we all need to agree, because we have one option. So if it's 3-1, we have no recommendation.
That's true.
Just one
But
other
we could also vote again at our meeting before town meeting.
That's kind of the way I'm leaning.
Right.
My other question is, are we going to be having a joint meeting sometime before this whole thing comes down?
I think the joint meeting, quite honestly, took a back seat as a result of the discussions that have taken place in the last 3 weeks. I think the purpose of that joint meeting is to establish some parameters as it relates to the upcoming FY16 budget.
Right.
Knowing that we are going to assume some additional costs because of the Auburn Middle School, and as well as assume through the tax levy the cost of the construction for Bay Path.
Right.
That is going to hit.
It would also be a good time to talk about this between the two committees. But I know the timing is just not working in our favor.
Yeah, we really should have a meeting, although I understand it's taking a back seat because this all came up. But if you could set one up, that would be very good, somehow or another. With Sharon.
It would be nice just to know that we're all on the same page. It seems like we're going, the option that we have right now is recommendation with an option before we even know what the selectmen want to do, what position they're taking. And if they do decide, and then that's fine, that is their decision to make. But after that, then discuss how this can be financed properly, and whether it's going to be their decision alone, or whether the finance committee should have some discussions back and forth.
And ultimately,
Yeah.
South Hold Road may have an impact on FY16.
Right.
Is that done within the confines of Prop 2.5? Is there any suggestion that a piece of excess levy is used in order to meet this commitment? I think all these things really need to be discussed because it helps us put together the building blocks for FY16.
Okay.
One more question.
Yep.
So if we don't have enough votes between the board by the town meeting, what would the chair's message be to the town meeting, that we
Well-
just don't have a recommendation?
Yeah, and I would say the vote and what our opinions are,
Okay.
Either way. I want to make a comment too. Knowing what our excess levy was, I was really against saying that if the town purchases the land, I didn't think it would make any sense at all to borrow the money, because we're sitting on the cash. But you've convinced me, you've made the argument that we should borrow it, so we can leave our reserves as they are. And especially when I hear that we saved $3 million by refinancing the high school debt. And that's because we get a better interest rate because our ratings were improved. So that's $3 million worth versus this amount of borrowing, and it makes sense to do the borrowing. Okay, all right, gentlemen, all set? Any other questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
No.
Okay, so 3-1. So there's no recommendation, we can vote again. Let's plan on having a meeting before the town meeting. Do you want to meet at 6 or 6:30? The town meeting is at 7?
6:30.
6:30 would be good, all right? Okay. All right, yes?
Through the chair, if I may, just to answer some of your questions, the PowerPoints that we've presented to the board are online on the main page.
Okay.
So you can see all the figures I kind of went over, as well as what Ed has here.
Yeah, I'd like to have a
Yeah,
chance
it's
to
all- and it's
digest
always
this a little
available.
more.
We're always available.
Yes, sir.
Gonna find my, Kevin Maher, I live at 4 Stonebridge, M-A-H-E-R. I just take a couple of minutes, this isn't like a selectmen's meeting, there's nobody competing to talk, and it's quite enjoyable. Purposes of disclosure, I abut the property, and before you label me NIMBY, for those who don't know what it is, it's not in my backyard. As I've told before, I went home with my wife on October 1. I heard Scott Sundin was buying the land behind us. And I said, honey, we really lucked out. Good builder. Excellent reputation. Then, October 14th, I find out he's doing a potential Chapter 40. Just to answer the question when I raised my hand earlier, in addition to Phase 1 and 2, there is a lower portion of the land that could potentially be developed into a Phase 3 with proper accesses up the road for an additional, this is a guess, 15, 18, 20 lots. The town manager made a presentation at the first meeting, and I do have some disagreements with components of it. We all know that. Some disagreements on methodology and sources. My concern tonight, I want to hand out something. There's been no risk assessment done. The town does not buy it. And I think that's an important factor for this panel.
You have an extra one for the record.
Oh, I got one out here. I'll leave it before I go. I only brought up enough for everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. The town manager is absolutely right. It is unknown what's going to happen. We just have no clue. The procedure is this. The town buys it or not. If the town does not buy it, the town's out of the picture. It's in the hands of the developer. I almost hate to say this because somebody made a comment. I'm a home builder and a realtor. Sometimes I'm a developer. I've been in Auburn 30-plus years, 35-plus years, done numerous projects. I will die in this town, and I will not default. There are some good developers out there. There's some bums. And this is not, Mr. Sundin is not a bum. But we don't know what's going to happen. I said at a previous selectmen's meeting, there's an attitude with developers. It's called maximum utilization. They're going to try to get every single unit out of the land they can. It's a natural process. The more units, the more profit. We don't know what he's going to do with the land. I've talked to other people in the real estate sector. I said, there's something here that doesn't make sense to me. You're going to put up 190 apartments, and then abutting it, you're going to build houses. It just doesn't sink that you're going to get a great return on the houses you're building next to apartments because there'll be so much resistance. And I had to think about that. This could happen. I don't know if it will, folks. Those 25 lots, 22 lots, it's actually 28 that he would be buying, the town's getting less because they're outside of the chapter, require half-acre lots down there. Some are bigger. Could he convert those into apartments? Because we have a rule book in Auburn, and if he doesn't use Auburn's rule book and he jumps to the state, we're out of the picture, no control. Maybe he did it and hold it on a friendly basis, but Mr. Sundin's business has been in that town for years. We don't know what's going to happen in Auburn. There's no emotional ties to the community. Something to factor. So I gave you just two different breakdowns. But I will say before I review them, there is one thing about residential real estate developments you really need to know. They are not money makers for towns. They never have been. If I went into a planning board and said, you ought to support this because it's going to make town money, they'd probably laugh at me. I've done probably a dozen projects in this town, and never once have I stood up in front of a planning board or a conservation commission and said, you ought to do this, it's going to make the town money. Residential housing doesn't work that way. It's pretty common knowledge. So I have two things here in front of you. If there's 200 apartments, or if it converts it upward to 260 apartments, it could go either way. It could be less, it could even be more than 260. As I indicated earlier, I had a little bit of disagreement with the management side of the table here on the methodology and sources and how they analyzed it, about acquiring it and selling house lots, putting roads in. And, you know, we can all have our disagreements. But I don't think you can look at the Holden data. I think there's other sources of data that we haven't looked at, the number of cars and all that good stuff. So it's not only if you don't buy it and it goes through, it's going to cost the town money. So if you only have 100 students, which a lot of people think is really a potential, it could cost the town $315,000 a year on the low end. If you go to 200, I'm only going to do the first column, and that's only for the basic school costs, which I took from the previous distribution of 6223. That could be upward or downward, like the town manager said. One police officer from the town manager's report, and the highway department from the town manager's report. There will be offsetting income here, there's no question about that. And so what I did is I took the $23 million and I factor it out on a per unit basis. So if you put 200 units in, it's going to be a $24.2 million project. It's going to throw off $418,000 in taxes on this apartments. It's going to cost you $733,000 a year. You're going to have a negative about $315 cost to the town on the low end. Let's talk the high end. 260 apartments. As you can see in these tables, on 260 apartments, you're going to have a 31 million point five taxable asset for the town to tax. And I think what you, I just want to show there's not a calculation error here. I see the calculator's out. Could you give me 31.5, did you get your calculator there? Could you do me a favor, 31,500 times
You mean
the tax
31
rate?
million?
31.5 million. Just want to make sure I didn't carry over a typo.
Times that rate?
Sorry?
I don't have my calculator.
Yeah,
I just want to make
Oh,
sure.
wait a minute, wait a minute.
I don't know if I changed one number, and I just want to verify I carried it over. No, I had it right, I'm sorry. The offsetting tax, 540,000. So if you have 260 units with the same cost basis in the previous page, it could cost you as low as $188,000 a year, up to $300,000 or $400,000 a year. Now, this, as my cover page says, is a work in progress. This is not a guarantee. I'm not saying these are the exact numbers. And I think the town finance, I'll be done in a minute.
All right.
I think the town finance officers here, which I look at you as, have to think, what if we don't buy it? What's it gonna cost the town? And I don't have any off-site components, like if there's required improvements on South Pole Road, if the, goes and gets his permits at the state, and the state says no mitigation on those roads, and we have to spend $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to fix those roads. So you gotta kinda look also, nobody's done a risk assessment on this transaction, and I kinda hope you look at it that way and consider it. Glad to answer any questions anybody has.
Chris?
I'm just looking at your numbers, just through, Mr. Chair. The 100 students? What if it was 50 students?
It'd be less.
I mean, if you cut that number in half,
I think.
because that's where we differ. I mean, that's where I think that where we're differing here.
Well,
It's an assumption we're all making. It's,
oh, they're assumptions, and I think the town manager says they're guesstimations and estimations, and we don't know what the final number of units are. I've talked to some other people, I put in some subdivisions, I tell you, they have a life of their own. When you put them in, you usually have a tendency to get a lot of new growth. I don't think there's gonna be empty nesters here, the market data that I've seen in this town. We don't have a lot of empty nesters searching for stuff in this town. I'm involved with the empty nester market in Leicester on a project. I don't know the exact number of students. Could it be 100? Could it be 250 if we have 260 units, 300 units? We don't know. I think when I do a project, I think worst-case scenario. Okay? It could be this, lift that up. You get hit with a couple extra special ed kids. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can throw your values off. So I don't know if the exact number. The town manager report had 71 students based on 223 houses, or 224. But we don't know the final number yet.
in Holden, what did they have? Was it 43?
Through the chair, yeah, I will double check that, but they came up with approximately 40, I think their number was 48 students on a 243 unit. Actually, my numbers that we had come up with were based on 190, not over 200. We based it on 190, but where the confusion may be with Kevin, and just to clarify, we also then added in the 25 single-family homes, because it's not just the apartments, there's also potentially 25 single-family homes. So that has to be added in when you do any kind of impact analysis.
We could be here all night trying to.
Oh, could I just say
find a
one thing
school
about
number.
Holden? Is
Yeah.
that even built out yet?
Was it the 90%?
I think Holden's still being developed.
Through the chair, I
those-
believe it's at about 90%, and this was based on their impact analysis, not on their final.
Yeah, it's
Gotcha.
guesses.
They are, we could, yeah,
Yeah.
who knows? We'll never know till,
Exactly.
right, we'll never know, but we can only make good estimates. Thank you for these figures,
welcome.
Kevin. Thank you. Any questions, gentlemen? No. Thank you, all right, and if you just got an extra copy, I'll put it in the record then too, okay? Thank you.
And through the chair, if I can, I just want to point out, and I think it's great. We can always disagree, and I think Kevin's done a great job, and that's what public discourse is all about. It's great. But I do want to point out one thing. There are some additional revenues that should be added in. If you're going to do a risk assessment, you need to also look at the annual auto excise taxes and the annual sewer revenues,
Gotcha.
both of which are, we
Thanks,
do have that
Kevin.
online. So
Okay,
I appreciate it, absolutely. We could go anywhere from 30 students to 300 students, so we can only go by what is the industry standard based on it. But I would also suggest that if the finance committee wants to look further, definitely look at the auto excise taxes, which we estimated at about $94,000 a year, and the annual sewer revenues at about $11,000 a year.
Okay,
There's also one-time revenues that I didn't mention because I didn't have this, so just keep in mind, and they are just one-time, so Kevin's correct, you can't add it in here, but it's something that you should be aware of. There's also building permit fees, sewer connection fees, and the rollback tax.
okay, thank you.
So, thank you.
Just fairness to my side.
Yep.
There is also added cost to those
Right,
services.
okay,
That are not factored in there.
all right,
We have to look at. I mean, I'll submit anything you want if you wanted to, but I don't think you should look at those values. I think you ought to look at the rec costs.
all right, thank you, Kevin. Gentlemen, anything else? All right, so we're scheduled to meet at 6:30. Tuesday night, before the town meeting at the high school. Is that okay? Do I hear a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.